To me, Ludum has always been about focusing on what I could do well, and that was mood and polish. But my jam games have never been fun or even funny. At best, they were weird. For Ludum 45, I decided to tackle at least one of these problems and shoot for a funny game. Unless, of course, the theme would invite something moody instead. See for yourself how that turned out for me. This is the post-mortem of my Ludum 45 game, Thanks for Nothing. I realized that making games is like an addiction. You view everything through this lens of making games. Magnets! Could be a game mechanic. My phone is running out of battery. Could be a game. There's a pony kicking someone in the head. Game. You're getting all giddy because all you can think about is making games, and you go, man, I could really make a game right now. This is when you turn to your friends and you go, hey, wanna make a game with me? Let's make a game, come on! Because you need to pull them down to your level. Because you can't bear to suffer this addiction alone. And because you're a horrible person. Theme voting always gets me. It's that special blend of hope and bitterness. Appropriately, I had to steel myself with some coffee for the final round. Start with Nothing was the theme right on top, and that looked familiar. Never mind. I gave it a whopping nothing. I fancied Night is Coming much more, probably because I had a single Castlevania reference I wanted to put in a game. The themes I like best never make it. As soon as I upvote something, I know it's doomed. Farewell, Night is Coming. Expectant of a crappy theme, I prepared my whiteboard accordingly on the day of the jam. This time it would start at midnight sharp, the witching hour. I passed the time to the announcement by trying to stay in control. Launching scenery at the baddies and being dazzled by real-time ray tracing. What a time to be alive. Then it was time to anxiously refresh Twitter to gain certainty. The theme was Start with Nothing, but as a theme I felt it was bad, much too open to be a meaningful constraint.
Start with Nothing, excuse me, that's every game I ever seen, this is so dumb.
My very first idea was to post an empty game maker or Unity project and encourage unfortunate players to make their own game from that. At least in the sarcasm department, I was off to a good start. Then it was stale idea after stale idea, before I washed up on the shores of Wikipedia again. There I found the mathematical concept of the empty set and quantum vacuum fluctuations. Yeah, both concepts went straight into the stratosphere. That is way over my head. I just kept scrolling further down and lo and behold, a tiny ghost town in Arizona is called Nothing AZ. That sparked my imagination to make a successor to my LD39 game Power MT in a similar fashion. My usual research routine took over and I scouted the place on Google Maps, watched YouTube videos,
So here you go. Nothing, Arizona.
And devoured the comments of people from around for further ideas. At 1:19, my initial fervor had cooled off somewhat. Do I want to make it funny or atmospheric? The latter would be nothing more than a rehash of Power MT, at best. If I wanted to make it funny, I needed a comedic angle, like Wasteland had, for example. That, though, would mean a lot of programming before any funny writing could commence, if at all. Even at its simplest, I would need to have all the expected affordances in place. Movement, collisions, NPCs, items, interactions, doors, and I wasn't even certain whether to go that route anyway. At 1:45, I veered to writing a funny adventure game story and then tried to shoehorn gameplay in. But the more I thought it over, the further I drifted from the theme. I felt my ideas for it weren't pure enough, that the nothing of the theme wouldn't be more than a token. I had around 10 ideas, not one elicited enough excitement to follow through. I was down in the dumps again. To lift myself up, I threw my worries overboard and forced myself to start writing something funny. A prologue to a non-existent RPG, making it up as I went along. Oh wow, those eggheads really did it. They created a bundle of pure nothing, a perfect specimen of lack thereof, the eponymous antimatter to power the last rocket ship from Earth. I envisioned it as my take on West of Loathing, an underrated and simply hilarious Western satire that looks like it could have been developed during a game jam as well. Actually, that looked manageable to do for a jam. Thus, I took West of Loathing as a guideline for my concept, working title West of Nothing, and kept chasing my stream of consciousness. For the 15 minutes that followed, I had fun. A good sign. I envisioned character classes such as Egghead, Outlaw and Rider, and a joke on my traditional text adventure beginnings. Darkness. All-engulfing darkness. I had a hazy story world and a setting, yes, but no ideas for the actual gameplay, plot and mechanics apart from top-down map exploration. And how on earth was there enough time for implementation? As it turned out, I would be standing on my own shoulders. With my Ludum 37 game, The Cellar, I had attempted something similar. It had a controllable character, collisions, simple interactions, and map exploration. I decided to start with that, rather than with nothing. I ripped out the old content and then added objects to pick up and interact with. For 2 hours I worked on the already hacky game jam codebase. Yet I couldn't shake a vague notion of impeding doom, as if everything was pointless. 5 in the morning. I called it quits for the day. I did have more than nothing, but less than necessary. At least there would be something to toy with when I'd get up. I slept badly. I couldn't help mulling over the theme, even in my dreams. Every idea was wrong in some way, like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle from hell. Around 3 in the afternoon, I got up at last. Connie liked my West of Nothing idea best. but for that I would need a proper system for handling all the text. And I was unsure whether I would be able to find a convenient solution. I had done something similar already with Memorandum, my entry for the previous Ludum Dare. But handling it was overly convoluted, and adapting it would be a project by itself. Each time you go round and round, it just plugs some flavor text. The plug flavor text line works pretty much. It seemed like I had no other choice but to Frankenstein together the code from Memorandum and the seller before I could do anything else. All I wanted to do was make something funny, not force two hacky code bases together in a weekend. But when life gets you down, get coffee. It's an established tradition of mine to flee from the scene of despair, to re-evaluate my ideas, and to have coffee, of course. A true pathetic fallacy. The weather was reflective of my mood again. My idea felt just as grey and devoid of highlights. Was it still the one I wanted to go with, or had I been overlooking a much better one? So I drank a lot of coffee. But what's not to love about coffee? It smells great, it's warm to the touch, and it allows you to fail faster and more often. So I wouldn't say that I'm addicted to coffee. I mean, I can stop whenever I want. I just don't want to stop because I get horrible withdrawal symptoms. I went to see my doctor about my consumption and they did some tests and turns out my blood type is cappuccino. Should there ever be a horrible accident, just hook me up to the espresso machine. I'm fine. Together with Connie, I tried to flesh out my idea. To avoid switching back and forth to text mode like in Memorandum, I decided to split up the screen. Gameplay on the left and a big text box on the right. Still, I detested wrangling fancy text display in GameMaker. I had no choice. Well, in fact I had two choices in addition to GameMaker even. One option was Twine, the best tool for authoring branching narratives. Though I didn't know how to pull off interesting map exploration and graphics, both I deemed important to my game. And then, of course, there's Unity, the Swiss army knife of game engines. Unity has a wonderfully straightforward approach to collisions and text boxes. But it's been over a year since I had dabbled with C#. Connie convinced me to try my hand at Unity. If I didn't feel hopeful after 3 hours, I could still switch to Twine or, goddess forbid, GameMaker. Though, was it a good idea to switch engines during a jam? Let's have a random YouTuber explain it. You don't know how long it will take you, and probably it will take you much longer than necessary. So yeah, just do the stuff you know you can do best and focus on that. In short, bad idea, don't do it. All those uncertainties triggered a streak of manic depression. At first I was in high spirits. I had a grand old time drawing up silly ideas and wacky NPCs, many based on my Patreon supporters. Okay, it's now 5 p.m. and this is the concept. Once I stepped back, I felt a kick in the teeth from reality. There wouldn't be enough time to do it all with GameMaker and I had too little experience with Unity.
Ich glaube, ich kann das nicht mit Unity.
Warum nicht?
Es ist so viel.
Worse, each minute I spent wavering was a minute lost on the implementation, and that drove me in a downward spiral. All you need is a plan. Over 17 hours in, I began outlining a simple design document of what I needed the game to do. A character that players could steer through a 2D world and have it interact with things, a permanent text box for narration and dialogue, NPCs to talk to, and changes to the global state of the game, of course. Individually, all those things seemed manageable. All I had to do was learn Unity well enough to make it happen. While we were waiting for the check, I was already watching tutorials and reading up on 2D character controllers in Unity. At this point I had a very flimsy story with a few ideas for wacky NPCs, 3 endings and a threadbare code design, but nothing truly funny. I had to hope for something funny to happen along the way. First, I had to teach myself enough Unity to be able to leave the safe harbor of familiarity. We arrived home 7:15 and I couldn't wait to get behind the keyboard again. I now had a concept, a plan, a goal. The coffee had done its magic.
You bet your ass!
I dusted the cobwebs off the Unity icon and got my bearings. Then scrawled a stand-in player character asset in Photoshop and set up the almighty text box in Unity. Hey, no coding required! But as soon as I created my first C# script, trouble ran into me. For some obscure reason, Visual Studio refused to do proper code highlighting for anything Unity. Being a relative novice, I couldn't do without this crucial feature. I had to get it to work before doing anything else. I reinstalled Unity. No luck. I reinstalled Visual Studio. I installed a different version of Visual Studio. Nope. I did it all a second time. Still nothing. This was all a huge mistake. It took me an hour until I came across the solution. To select Visual Studio as Unity's external editor and not devenv.exe. Who would have thought? Almost 21 hours after the announcement, I started programming on my game properly. The tabs in my browser kept piling up as I was stumbling through my first scripts of code. Concurrently, Conny felt a craving for Kaiserschmarrn, a traditional Austrian dessert. And we dug into our individual projects. After 2 hours of trial, warning and error, I had something barely working. A moving player character that would collide with scenery and display the name of any item in range. There was only one item, Rocky, the Rock. It was enough for me to fully commit to Unity. I was beyond the point of no return anyway. If I couldn't finish with Unity, I wouldn't finish at all. A quarter to halftime, I felt ready to implement my first NPC. Having them react to player stats and be reactive was too hard for the moment, so I kept the dialogue linear. Then followed up with a crude global state machine, much like I would do things in GameMaker. In the meantime, Conny had finished her edible masterpiece. It was in a much better condition than my code. Also, it tasted better. At 1 in the morning I had the intro text hooked up and working, though at this point the game was a completely linear affair. I had overlooked how to cleverly integrate branching and would need to design something that would just work, clever or not. I jumped between trying out code and googling basic Unity concepts, and the stack of open tabs in Firefox grew to a precarious degree. Not knowing the correct way of doing things in Unity slowed me down more than necessary. My lack of experience was glaring in my botched attempt at a dialogue system. At its heart, it was implemented via scriptable objects. Each page of dialogue was nothing more than a chain of such objects, one referencing the next, some with ham-fisted branching information. Anything but elegant, but sufficient. Barely. For all sprites in my game, I went the traditional route and drew them with ink on paper. I digitized my art with my phone, edited the results in Photoshop, and shoved everything to Unity. Around 4:30, I felt that the game's visuals were moving forward, but I had hit a conceptual wall. The whole thing that I've coded so far feels like you pushing a big boulder down from a summit and finally managed to get it rolling. But the problem is now I want it to go left, and currently it's just plowing down straight ahead, and what I need to do now is somehow manage to get this player agency thing in there. And when I have this, then I can finally flesh it out, and it's not going to be a Ludum winner, but at least I try to make it funny for a change and not too gloomy like I always do. Yeah, back to work. Moreover, I was getting tired, and we all know that sleepy code is bad code. Undeterred, I kept working. If I couldn't produce good code any longer, I could at least lay down the level. Thus, I framed the small map with impassable cliffs to keep players from getting lost. Before hardcoding any more NPCs, I just wanted to do a quick test compilation. Instead of the compiled game hitting it off with my witty dialogue as in the Unity editor, it reverted to default content everywhere and no interaction worked. Not a single one. Worse even, some of my scriptable objects corrupted when running the game in Unity now, seemingly at random. My only solution to that was copy-pasting their values from an earlier snapshot each time something broke during my investigation. What the hell was going on? So when I'm having a programming problem that I can't solve on my own, I Google for someone having the same problem. And usually I find them on Google on page 19 of the search results. At this point, we're already a bit desperate. And it's this post from 1996. But at least it got one reply to it. It's from the original poster and it reads, "Never mind, fixed it." How? So now I'm on this grand quest to track this person down, because apparently they know something. After 3 to 5 days of research, I got their full name, their street address, their social security number. And I'm this close to finding them, this close, until I learn of this horrible, horrible boating accident in which they died under mysterious circumstances. You know why? Because they knew too much. The sun had long risen when I found the culprit of it all. The file name of my scriptable object source code was different to the class name defined inside it. Yeah, classic beginner's mistake. Once that was fixed, the game compiled and ran as expected, but I had lost a good deal of sleep and time allotted for content creation. My final act that session was to check, copy and organize the videos I recorded for this post-mortem. I think I fell asleep for a minute watching the progress bars. Good morning! I mean, if 2:50 in the afternoon still counts as morning. 9 hours to go. Not enough to implement all my ideas, not by a long shot. But maybe just enough for something, provided I managed my time most effectively. I wanted to be very professional about that. I set up a spreadsheet and entered all the tasks still unfinished and how much time I could devote to each. And then, I never looked at it ever again. I had to pay a good friend a visit in the kitchen. Someone needed a hug. Our dear espresso machine, always there for me. Thus, my breakfast consisted of coffee, nuts and berries. Perfect brain food for an intense game dev session ahead. Like the day before, I was having a hard time getting the game react to player choices, and it became apparent that I wouldn't be able to add any more NPCs into my game that did more than repeat their line of dialogue. To convey to players that the game remembered, that the game cared, I added each object you pick up to a list as a simple string. The epilogue would itemize what you had put in your bag. The game was missing a proper introduction to tell its backstory. I worked on the technical side of the intro until I was down to 6 hours to spare and could do the art. With no time to waste, I scribbled whatever came to me, keeping things modular so that I could clone and move them around in Photoshop easily. That was a good time saver. My code wouldn't get any prettier, so I doubled down on hard-coding more specifics for intro and epilogue. If you can't avoid it, own it. 3.5 hours left, and I finally had a beginning and an ending. If you feel there's something missing, you're right. Music. It was evident that my usual electro-synth drones would not fit the game. The setting was supposed to feel a little like a barren waste. To evoke that feeling, I took a spoonful of inspiration from Fallout New Vegas and a shovelful from Neil Young's soundtrack for Dead Man. I dusted off my good old Les Paul Classic and got to work improvising over a few basic chords. Just a track or two of distorted guitars, that felt possible. Something wide, something creepy, something that says Grand Adventure, Size of Actual Adventure may vary, no refunds. And something with character. That last part is very much influenced by Yasunori Mitsuda's theme for Gato, the singing robot in Chrono Trigger. Within an hour, I had gone from nothing to 4 short tracks, produced, rendered, and ready to put in the game. There was only one problem. How? The internet to the rescue again. More browser tabs went on the Jenga tower, and I managed to learn enough for a passable solution. I got it to work much faster than anticipated.
I am a programming god. With my divinity, I shall implement sound effects. There's still an hour left.
That the effects would not clash with the rough handmade presentation either, I plugged my guitar in once again and tried to invent as many different sounds as possible. In Unity, I added another audio player so that music and one sound effect could play concurrently. I compiled the game, without troubles this time, and took it for a short test drive. On one hand, I was happy that I had produced something that worked. On the other, it pained me to see so little of my ideas and characters made it into the game. Worst of all, there was not much for players to see and do. 21 minutes to midnight. Ample time to keep adding, as long as I didn't waste any with thinking. I hooked up the unused pony sprite with a few lines of unrevised text, straining to be funny. The first and only joke that bubbled to the surface was the pony vomit joke, or pommet as I like to call it. 12 minutes left. Brain off, pen on. On the last page of my pad, I squeezed in scribbles of collectible Easter eggs. A Game Boy, a Gordon Freeman Memorial Crowbar, a Dr. Mario pill, a Tetris block, a jar of moisturizer, and, running short on originality, a literal Easter egg. 5 minutes to implement the new junk and scrawl a description for each item. Deadline. Time for a breather, and to put the game thoroughly through its paces. It launches, testing over.
Passed.
I couldn't lean back yet. I needed to package everything for submission. That meant botching up an icon graphic, taking screenshots, and designing a title card for the Ludum page. My game's presentation is sketchy at best, literally, so I set the title on a green background for a bit of color to gussy it up a little. Concurrently to writing the description, I compiled the game for Windows, Mac and Linux. Hey, my first multi-platform launch! 8 minutes before the submission hour ended, I had everything in place and checked the game one last time before hitting publish for good. Nothing beats the first relaxing minute after hours of tenseness. Everything had worked out in the end. I made a complete game in Unity, starting with nothing. And there was nothing left for me to do either. In the past, Unity had always intimidated me. It has so many features to offer that no matter how much I studied, I never felt secure enough to attempt programming anything serious, an entire game for real. With Ludum 45, however, I was lacking the time to remain apprehensive. The deadline breathing down my neck, I jumped into the deep end and had learned to swim. Well, perhaps float is a better word, as I was being kept above the surface, barely, by hundreds of forum threads and examples. Not drowning counts as success in my book. But what would others think of my sorry effort? As I saw the final rankings, I couldn't believe it. 91st overall? 12th in audio? 2nd in humor? And even 168th in fun? For a game where you just walk around in for half a minute before triggering the ending? Huh. I looked at the statistics of all of my Ludum Dare entries and noticed a correlation. A game that ranked high in humor was also well rated in fun. In short, I learned that comedy appeases. If your game is ugly AF, without actual gameplay, and a story that exists, bury the shortcomings under jokes. Lots of jokes. Even bad ones.
If you have a game with 4 jokes in it and one of them is bad, your game is only 75% funny. If you have a game with 1,000 jokes in it and 250 of them are bad, then your game is 75% funny.
So with my first Ludum Dare, after 48 hours I finished with something. It was this little bundle made of blood, sweat, tears, duct tape and chewing gum. And it's ugly. God, it's ugly. But it's mine, and I'm so very proud of it. And I want to introduce it to the world. Set the stage for my little abomination. Problem is that it can't climb the steps onto the stage because I didn't implement this. There was no time. So I have to pick it up myself and place it in front of a mildly caring audience. Much like you actually. And I whisper into its little misshapen ear. Make Daddy proud. And then it starts to sing. It starts doing the song that we both rehearsed for the past 2 days. And I'm so proud. And then it catches fire. It topples over, screaming at the top of its lungs, and soils itself. All at the same time. And at this point, I knew, guess I'm a proper game developer now. Thank you. Good night.